The battlefield is a machine of pure chaos. And within that chaos, there are rules. Combatants fight. The wounded fall. And the medics, they save. They are the keepers of humanity in hell, bound by the Geneva Conventions, identified by their Red Cross insignia. They do not fight. But what happens when the line between savior and soldier vanishes? When the only medicine left is a rifle? This is the story of a moment when those rules were torn apart. A story of when 17 men of the United States Medical Corps stopped a concerted enemy assault, and a bandaged platoon held the line. The date, December 16th, 1944. The location, the Losheim Gap, a critical sector in the Ardennes forest of Belgium. This is the opening hour of the German offensive that would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. Through the pre-dawn fog and snow, a tidal wave of German infantry and panzers smashed into thinly held American positions. Among the units reeling from the shock was the 423rd Infantry Regiment, 106th Infantry Division. As German forces infiltrated and bypassed strongpoints, chaos spread. In this maelstrom, a single medical detachment attached to the 423rd's 1st Battalion found itself isolated, led by a 24-year-old technical sergeant and aid station chief named John Jack R. Jones. This group of 17 medics and aid men had established a temporary casualty collection point in a cluster of sturdy stone farmhouses near the hamlet of Au. Their mission was clear: treat the wounded flowing back from the crumbling front. They had bandages, sulfa powder, morphine syrettes, and litter. They had no machine guns, no grenades, and only a handful of personal M1 carbines for emergency defense. They were healers, not fighters. But by mid-morning, the sounds of war were no longer distant. They were closing in. The main American lines had been pushed back, unknowingly leaving Jones and his medics and over 30 severely wounded GIs lying on litters in the farmhouse, behind enemy lines. Sergeant Jones, peering through a frost-coated window, saw not retreating Americans, but gray-clad figures moving through the pine trees. Just 300 yards to the east, a German reconnaissance patrol from the 18th Volksgrenadier Division was probing the area. They had found the farmhouses. Jones faced an impossible choice: abandon the wounded to capture, or worse, or stand and defend a position with men untrained for infantry combat. His decision was instant. They would fight. He ordered his medics to break out the few carbines and the single .30 caliber Browning automatic rifle they had for perimeter security. They distributed bandoliers of ammunition from the wounded infantrymen's kits. Pause. The medics, their Red Cross brassards still on their arms, took up firing positions at windows and doorways. Their patients, men with shattered limbs and torso wounds, propped themselves up to help load magazines. By 1100 hours, the German patrol, now numbering roughly a platoon of 35 men, began a deliberate approach. They moved from tree to tree, confident the buildings were merely a logistical tale. They did not expect resistance. Technical Sergeant Jones waited. He instructed his men to hold fire until the enemy was well within range. The bitter cold was forgotten, the only sound the crunch of snow under German boots. At 150 yards, Jones gave the order: "Fire!" The crack of M1 carbines and the sharper report of the bar shattered the forest silence. 3 German soldiers fell immediately. The rest scrambled for cover, stunned. The first wave was repelled, but the medics had revealed themselves. They were no longer a medical station. They were a strong point that had to be eliminated. For 2 hours, a tense firefight erupted. The Germans, now reinforced, brought up a pair of MG-42 machine guns. The terrifying ripping sound of Hitler's buzzsaw filled the air, stitching the stone walls of the farmhouses with rounds, sending chips of stone flying. Mortar rounds began to walk in, exploding in the frozen yard with deafening crumps. Inside, the scene was one of surreal horror. Medics dashed between treating new gunshot, wounds now inflicted on themselves, and returning fire. A medic named Private First Class Allen, his own arm bandaged from a shrapnel graze, calmly applied a tourniquet to a screaming rifleman, while another medic, Corporal Diaz, fired controlled bursts from the bar at a German squad trying to flank them. Ammunition was running critically low. The German pressure was intensifying. A direct assault seemed imminent, and in the main room, 30 wounded men, utterly defenseless, listened to the battle rage around them. Fear was a tangible presence, thick in the air alongside the smells of cordite, blood, and damp wool. The machine gun fire was relentless. It seemed only a matter of minutes before the enemy would overrun their makeshift fortress. It was then, in the darkest moment, that the defining act of courage emerged. It didn't come from a fresh reserve, but from the very men they were trying to save. Seeing the medics, boys who had days before only handled bandages, now, fighting like seasoned infantry to protect them, something stirred in the wounded. A sergeant from Fox Company, his leg in a splint, hoisted himself up using a rifle as a crutch. "I can still pull a trigger," he yelled. Another, with a chest wound, began passing loaded carbine magazines to the window. And what happened next was not an ordered maneuver. It was an organic uprising of sheer will. Every wounded man who could hold a weapon, who could sit up, who could aim, asked for one. The medics, fighting for their lives, handed rifles over. Soon a bandaged platoon was formed. Men with slings and splints, pale from blood loss, took positions at every aperture. A synchronized volley of fire erupted from the farmhouse that astonished the German attackers. The volume of return fire had suddenly, impossibly, doubled. Sergeant Jones, realizing the psychological power of this, coordinated their fire. He had the walking wounded concentrate on the enemy machine gun nest to their left. A concentrated hail of 30-6 rounds suppressed the MG-42 crew, forcing them to retreat. The German infantry, seeing their suppressing fire vanish and meeting unexpected, fierce resistance from what they thought was a soft target, hesitated. Their assault lost its momentum. Using this lull, Jones orchestrated a daring repositioning. He had 2 medics and 3 of the more mobile wounded slink out a back cellar door. Under covering fire, they sprinted to a knocked-out American Jeep 50 yards away, retrieving several cases of ammunition and 2 more automatic weapons. They made it back, breathless but resupplied. The reinforced makeshift garrison fought on through the afternoon. As dusk began to fall at 16:30 hours, the German attacks ceased, unwilling to waste more men, and time on what was clearly a determined pocket of resistance. The German commander bypassed the farmhouses, leaving a screening force behind. Under cover of darkness, Sergeant Jones organized a daring breakout. Using salvage litters and improvised sleds, his medics and the able-bodied wounded evacuated all 30 casualties through a ravine and a frozen creek bed, navigating by the stars and the sounds of distant battle. After a grueling 5-hour march through enemy-held territory, they linked up with elements of the 7th Armored Division near St. Vith. The cost had been high. Of the 17 medics, 4 were killed and 7 wounded. Several of the original wounded succumbed to their injuries during the ordeal, but they had saved over 24 lives that would have certainly been lost to captivity. For his leadership, valor, and his initial decision to defend the wounded at all costs, Technical Sergeant John R. Jones was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's 2nd highest award for combat valor. Several of his medics received Silver Stars. The official citation reads, in part, he transformed a medical detachment into an effective infantry unit, inspiring his men and the wounded to resist against impossible odds. This was not a story of a major battle that changed the course of the war. It was a story of a small, forgotten corner of hell, where the oath to preserve life demanded the courage to take life, where 17 healers and a bandaged platoon chose to make a stand, not for a hill or a town, but for the simple, profound principle that the wounded would not be abandoned.